actually read up the introductory players booklet on Ptolus?
No.
Gotcha. So I would say it is best to say that you are not from Ptolus because you don't have any real preconceived notion of what the city is. At best, you've got the cursory introduction that I've given. So what kind of things do you think would bring a druid outlander to a place like Ptolus? Do you think you've come here from actually somewhere far away and very foreign to Ptolus? Have you always been on the outskirts and known that the city is there, but kind of avoided it? It's a very metropolitan place. It's home to many races and many different peoples. Um, it's somewhat now the heart of the Empire of Tarsus. But do you think Red has a reason to have come here now? What do you think's kind of driving you towards delving, which is just another word for adventuring?
The main reason Red even left the forest was, and this is kind of how I wrote it, is that his elders of the circle wanted him to go out and experience the world. And, now that he's getting old enough to do it, to get a little bit of perspective on what it is that nature actually involves as a whole throughout the world, and not just what he saw in his forest. So pretty much he's just herp derping around trying to get as much experience as possible.
Let me have you roll either a history check or an arcana check. Ooh, you got nature. You could do nature instead of the arcana. Oh, my bad. There's no longer yet. At this point, just roll a die and let me know what the actual modifier is for that.
So nature is +3, so it'll be 21
Gotcha.
total.
So, what do you think the nature of your druid circle is? Have you thought about what subclass of druid you're going to move towards? Do you think you are planning on something like moon druid? Are you thinking about one of the the regional druid circles? What kind of thoughts had you put into that?
Um, I believe. Give me just a minute. That I'm probably gonna lean more towards. Trying to remember which one it was.
Doing the astrological signs one? Um, Something like the fire druids, the spore druids, circle of shepherds.
Honestly, I'll probably just go Circle of the Moon.
Alrighty. So your your circle of druids are likely worshippers of um, three different named deities. I don't have two of them offhand prepared. They are the two visible moons. There is a third moon that has not been seen for some thousands of years. And druids are among the few creatures that can actually exist for long enough to understand, to remember, and to appreciate the value of knowing that the Valis moon is missing from the sky. Vallis. There have been certain movements in the other two moons and reasons to start to recognize that portents of Valus's return have been seen. And perhaps the view greater things, experience the wider world, is also a bit of a feeler to throw you into kind of the maelstrom of society that none of them could go back to. There's a certain sense of you know enough of their ways to not become polluted by the, for lack of a better word, cancer of society and Ptolus in particular. But they have gone so far that they could never blend in as a natural, normal person, like somebody who belonged there. So they'll always be kind of self ostracized. So there's a certain balance of they have to find somebody who's prepared and well enough schooled, but also somebody who is not so far along that they can't fit into normal ways. So on some level, I think that is probably all you would necessarily know, have been given the name and the portents. I think it's enough to recognize that normally when you talk about uh, predictions towards the future, you also discuss whether they are good or bad. And I would say that part of the point there is that nobody understands how to interpret this yet. The return of the Valus moon is something that could be incredibly good, could be incredibly bad, but it will inevitably change the way life exists. And for druids, neither path there is good or bad. Life doesn't have to be what it is. Life is change. Life and death are coupled together. In death comes new life. And in life, there is the guarantee of death. So I would say that's a little bit of kind of backstory reason to be for you. Ptolus in particular will have plenty of things for you to search for in that effort. Um, I think you can potentially know um, that they probably understand. Most normal people probably won't even recognize the actual name. Um, and perhaps with like a final kind of like word of warning from before you left the woods and actually went towards Ptolus itself, it might be one of those things to be cautious. The knowledge of this moon alone might be a worthy enough reason for somebody to kill you.
Gotcha. Don't go running my mouth about the Valus Moon.
So that's reason enough to actually bring you to Ptolus itself. If you're coming from like closer places like Moon Silver Forest is kind of right above Ptolus. The Mornwood Wood is near it, but still somewhat far away. And then some of the other northern forests over near Null are ages away. And it just kind of brings back into question sort of um, how far or close do you want to be from your circle? Had you thought about that at all?
It doesn't really matter, you know. I feel like he would travel as far as he felt he needed to gain the experience that the elders sent him out to look for.
Roll a D100 for me.
81.
So, I'd say let's throw you out to the Great North Woods we will put your circle quite far away. Theoretically, this is still a simple enough journey. Enough of the Tarsian Empire still exists that you've kind of passed through both wild lands as well as civilized lands on your path to Ptolus. But I'd say we'll put you as you are quite far away from your actual circle. You might find yourself having delays in both the Black Angel Forest as well as the Mornwood, and you might soon find solace with the Moonsilver Forest. There's other wood nearby, but in the long run, those are the actual like forests of these areas. Much of this is still like basically plains where there's trees, but it's not necessarily what you would really want when you're thinking about home, kind of thing. But I'd say we can put you as like from the Great North Woods. Um, and perhaps among some of the kind of portents of war, uh, the like more negative things might actually be some of the raids that you all would have experienced. Maybe like two generations or so before you, but that's where it kind of gets hazy because druids the generation before you might effectively be almost like frozen at like 30 or 40 years old and not age any beyond that. So it could be kind of shady and like foggy how you want to choose that. But on some level, basically, about like 30 to 50 years ago, Tarsus was invaded, and those invading forces came over the Grey Mountains. So you all would have had some of that kind of effect. And that can be a little bit more of kind of like almost like a side understanding of what this might mean. And again, like we're talking about a moon that's been missing for thousands of years. Things that happened 50 years ago are still, very present to this moment. But that can give you another like kind of geopolitical reason as to what kind of sent you here now. So we'll have you very much kind of a foreigner in these lands, and we'll have you kind of coming in from the South Gate.
That's actually hilarious too, because I wrote that Red was riding through a caravan with his parents and they got killed, and he's 30. So
Yeah, so I mean that it's very much. I mean, I always see parallels in history with how it is, but this is effectively um, that story is effectively the Germanic tribes who raided Rome and effectively like held Rome for think it was about like 3 or 5 years kind of thing before they ended up like falling back and leaving for the Asiatic steppes. And that's effectively what that campaign is, what that's kind of talking about, is when the tribes from the north, who were mercenaries for Rome, came for Rome and took Rome, like at the fall of the height of the empire. And that's one of the kind of like prevailing things of this is the Tarsian Empire is dead. It's just a question of when the people who are part of this empire actually recognize that. So it's one of the things like this is currently the seat of the empire, but there's three different emperors. The one who's here, the one who's actually in Tarsus, and then the person who pretty much has the best claim to it. Um, really, there's no reason for your character to necessarily know that. But as having your parents kind of slain in, um, it could just as likely be them leaving Tarsus as it was when they were coming to Tarsus. But having lost your parents there, you might at least understand that part of what took them from you, and this might not even be negative with like current druid attitudes, part of what took them from you is the fall of the empire. It getting weak allowed for the barbarians to come in and to take Tarsus. So you can kind of feel however you want about that aspect. But I think it would be one of those things that kind of sits with you, um, is that recognition. Um, yeah. So more than likely, you would be coming from the south. Uh, Again, you understand to the west of Ptolus is this spire that sticks up thousands of feet into the air. It basically crosses the actual clouds overhead. Most days you see the spire of rock just piercing into the sky and then disappearing, with no reference to how high or how far it's going to go. I think on some level, still with that trip into Ptolus, you would at some points see clearer days. It is often raining somewhere in Ptolus, so it's almost always clouded. But at the same time, there is still occasional clear days where there would be an astonishing and also recognition that this is entirely unnatural. It is a needle pointing into the sky that extends up for about a mile.
Yeah.
So, heading into the city, you would have a few different options. There's essentially three southern gates. One is kind of covered with a bunch of people who have vaguely settled around it. It almost has its own kind of like mini markets and kind of mini town growing up around it. That is effectively the main gate to get in via the southern way. It doesn't mean that you can't get in through one of the other southern gates. It's just kind of a question of um, what business that you have and whether you belong there. When you go, are you going to try to go into the city legally and naturally?
Yeah, for sure.
Gotcha. So I think the most normal thing to do would simply be to pass through the actual main gate, for the South Market, which is basically going through that kind of city of just like decrepit kind of. It's effectively the poor who are so poor that they can't actually even get into the Warrens to set up in the Warrens. But one of the things is this place is like a horrific kind of scene of sorts, but it also doesn't have the criminality that the Warrens have. Much of the city has poorer places, but these are definitely the cheapest places to live while also still getting to benefit from being next to the largest, most like metropolitan city in the region. Probably only about like let's say maybe like 10 minutes or so of walking through that camp before you get to the gates. When you do get to the gates, you would see town guards and basically see that these walls of the city are manned by people who are holding both in actual like tower like guard stations with actual like ballista and kind of things like held up in these defensive points, as well as the ability for the guards to walk along the walls. Uh, Most of what you would probably see is that it's almost like the guards are there, they're not watching. When you get to the gates themselves, effectively, there's kind of different class striations immediately kind of visible here. You're not going to see upper class people. They pretty much can like fast track themselves through like the South Gate. You don't see a lot of industrial stuff. That's all going into the actual Gilder's Gate. What you do see is the difference in people who are citizens and hold that paperwork and people who don't have that paperwork. You'll just end up kind of waiting in line longer while you see there's not like a lot of people who are lined up to get into the city, but there is a constant flow of people coming to the city. but you can basically see, like, maybe you wait for 20 or 30 minutes and you see anybody who's actually has the paperwork of a citizen of the empire can kind of just walk in, show their paperwork, and like the guards are fast tracking them. I think of like when you go to the airport and you are a frequent flyer, like where you pay, I feel like it's like 40 or $100 for a year, and you put yourself into a security check. So they've got you in a pre-security checked like data bank. So it saves you a few minutes to have that extra like identification, but pretty quickly the guards are busy enough. They don't really care. They're basically just checking that what do you have weapon wise? I think you had um
Spear and a shield.
so it was something like that. They'll kind of see that you've got weapons. You're not really like armored, but they'll kind of look to you and um what's your business in Ptolus? And essentially, like, you don't necessarily have to like role play to that, but my point was is they'll basically ask you what your business is. Um, Answering something effectively, not threatening them. They'll kind of look you over, look at all of your equipment, and you'll get ended up asking, "And are you carrying a firearm?" Don't have a pistol with you. You don't need special certification for that, and they'll basically let you through the gate. That is the effective level of their security. Are you a local, like with actual identification for member of the? Why can't I think of an empire? Do you have a firearm, and is that registered? All right, cool. Go inside. Um, I think what they would probably pause you for like one moment while you're going through is to kind of get a length of time and essentially to collect taxes on where you will be in Ptolus. So let me get a history check from you here. So I think this should be just +3. Oh wait, no, history is intelligence. My bad. Are you there, Chase? Can you roll a d20?
Hey, sorry about that, Mara. I had to run to the bathroom.
Can you roll a history check for me?
Yeah. As soon as I could figure out what the hell there it is. So that's going to be a 4. Three plus one.
Gotcha. So I think without a particular place in mind where you're going to go, I think what the guards will basically charge you is it's a copper a day to enter the city. And they'll basically ask you where you're going, how long you'll be here, and for an address where you intend to go. Without necessarily having those things in mind, you'll basically get pointed to a few different options. They'll send you to a place like Delver Square, where you have potters, and that is a more expensive hostel. Um, you can get sent to a place like the Warrens, where you can kind of just find a place, defend yourself at your own risk. You can leave the city at nightfall and come out to a place like this in the tent city. Or I think that's probably what you're going to get from the guards as far as things go. Um, what do you think you would go for on something like that? Are you going to um, go for something like the more expensive, going towards Delver Square and a hostel there, or the Warrens, which is just dangerous, but also potentially, gives you still a place to be in the city and resting, or kind of returning and leaving the city each night?
I think I would probably go more towards Delver Square.
Gotcha. So they'll basically fill out for you that you intend to go to Potter's Hostel, and they'll like kind of fill out that actual information for you. They'll take your name from you, and how long do you intend to stay?
I would say I'm gonna be here for, at least 2 weeks.
All right, and they'll collect probably a silver from you now, and they'll basically tell you not to leave Potter's Square or Potter's before the second week because somebody will come to collect taxes in that second week. So it's just one of those things like if you're not there, technically the guard will start looking for you. Um, and Yeah, I think they'll basically give you the information where the watchtower is for the South Market. It's the one I don't have prepared to like zoom in on. They'll give you the location of the watchtower for the South Market. If you do need to change where you're staying, that's where you would have to go to not become a criminal, basically.
Okay, gotcha. After that, once I've got done with the guards, I feel like Red would just be walking around staring at everything, kind of starstruck with what's going on.
Gotcha. So, like, the initial thing that you're going to come into is the South Market is one of the nicer locations in the actual city. It's one of the kind of newest actual constructions. It tends to be kind of upper working class, middle class folk. It is flanked by the actual cliffs with The Dalengard is the old castle that used to surround the actual this actual area, and the spires kind of up behind Dalengard's like castle walls. So you're kind of looking up. Want to say Dallen's cliffs are like 200 or so feet when you like look to the west. That you see then these massive walls and like embankments, and many of them have these like three-barreled, not necessarily any reason for you to understand what they mean when they say guns when they ask you about that, nor that you would necessarily understand when you see cannons, but Dalengard is flanked by cannons. And these three-barreled cannons sit every 100 or so feet along the wall. From a distance, they probably look pretty small, might look somewhat like ballista, which would be much easier to recognize, but it's still a sight to behold. You would still see the massive spire rising beyond the actual fortress, but I think the fortress of Dalengard is far more likely for your people to understand, as it is, I think, thousands of years old. I think it's close to like 3 or 4 thousand years old. The actual city is here because of that defensive castle. The way it was built off from the coast, that was the initial construction here. Walking through the town in this area, a lot of it does smell good with like foods and things that are being prepared, but a lot of this area is more kind of textile based things. A lot of these are like secondary goods. So if you had like a walking stick, this is where you might have somebody who's carving them, so they're really beautiful, elaborate, like cobra or different things like that, where you have like beautification done to something that is already produced. But there is still plenty of food being produced in a place like this. You would have smells of different dishes from all over the actual empire. It would be one of those things where there's certainly like things I'm sure that would kind of remind you of home. Um, just as regional dishes go, uh, the South Market is kind of the place where you would probably experience a lot of those things most. But the city itself is going to immediately be just this massive cacophony of things happening around you. Um, when you're walking around, the guard would probably give you enough information that as long as you stay on the wider streets, you're going to do pretty well to find your way towards Delver Square, effectively telling you to follow Penny Street, and then from that, pick the widest street that is off on your right, and that center street that will take you essentially towards Delver Square. And one of the things that you'll notice is like Penny Street is about like 10 or 15 feet wide. When you look down some of the side streets, like if you look down Owl Street, that's going to be like 7 or 10 feet wide. Some of the even more side alley streets are like 3 or 4 feet wide. So you can very quickly see the difference between main streets and side streets as you're walking through, that there's enough space for, say, like a wagon on the main streets, but they're very quickly like not capable of getting places that are side streets. But as you wander in for that first little bit, let me have you roll a perception check.
All right, I'm really, really good at these. No, I'm not. That's a 14. Nah, 14's okay.
So, walking through the initial part of the city, finding yourself into kind of the central square that has like the spokes of the South Market radiating off from it, you have a pretty solid idea that to your right you can spot Center Street and start to follow it. And from what they told you, you're right near the actual watch house. If you don't take the time to find it, it wouldn't be like a huge problem. Um, as far as things go, like as a outlander, you can usually find your way places. So for what it is, I would say without taking the time to kind of spot things, you vaguely know that the watch house is in that kind of area. If you started to ask people, that's always going to kind of get you back to it. Um, so as far as that goes, when you first find Center Street and you're kind of like aimed and primed to go towards Delver's Market, do you think you're going to take that time to find the watch house right away? Or are you just kind of moving on like that information's in my memory banks and strolling forward?
I feel like he'd just be moving forward, man. He's got a general direction of where the watch house is, should he need it, and he's bound and determined to see what all the hype is about Delver Square.
Gotcha. So you've got a full, like, flowing city all around you. This would probably be one of those situations where, like, you can very quickly tell somebody who doesn't belong in New York City because they're walking at a normal pace. Anybody who belongs there is actually at, like, a light run at all points. Very few people who live there are actually moving at a pace that you would do on purpose. Like, or that you would do like with anything but purpose. And you can kind of like feel that where people are like bumping and jostling you. There's people along the actual edges who are like holding out food, and you might start reaching for some and having people who are immediately like begging for money from you, depending on how regular you are, how often you've ever been to a city, you may or may not get kind of scammed by these first few people who are like holding out like a bit of food, and the moment you like take it from them and take a bite, they're begging for like 2 or 3 copper because you've now agreed to the transaction that you didn't know was happening. But you don't let that happen to you more than a few times before you start to recognize, like, all right, these people are not handing me food, they're trying to sell me food. And you can move along and through the actual area. Probably takes you about a half hour or an hour to walk most of the way through the South Market here. Um, Certainly kind of speeding up as you get a little bit better sense of things, as you don't necessarily kind of get like caught up as much by the actual city all around you. One thing that probably makes it a little bit easier to move after a few moments is simply that you're no longer like looking towards the spire. The spire will always have an eerie, sort of evil, foreboding feeling to just its sight. And you can almost, let me actually get an insight check for me.
Boy, Howdy, I'm gonna tell you right now that ain't gonna be good. That's gonna be a 5.
It's enough so that you can kind of recognize like a lot of people who are here don't even look at it. And you can kind of like, you can kind of pick up on a certain sense of how often you spot somebody who's like just entirely head down. They're not, their gaze is never even going high enough up. And occasionally, over like an hour or so of like walking around and being near these people, you're starting to recognize that a lot of people don't look high enough up to actually see the spire. And there's certainly very few people who are actually neck up, craned, like looking for the peak of it. Um, but occasionally you do find yourself kind of like caught up in it, and every once in a while, when you're like catching your attention, like that you're focused on the spire, kind of shaking your head back to like a normal awareness, you'll notice that there's like, you're probably taller than most people in this place, like a little over 6 feet. You see basically at the height of most people's heads, and every once in a while you'll just see somebody else's forehead as they're doing the same thing, like catching their awareness like craned back towards the spire, and they're just kind of getting back towards thing. But it has this eerie effect on a lot of people, and you can start to sense the locals by the fact that the locals are the people who have almost gotten beyond it. But you don't really know too much about how to work with that yet, except for that for you, right now, it's very much unnatural and it's interesting. You're getting your closest looks pretty much every time you go about looking. As you push further and further through the South Market, you are going to follow Center Street all the way into the Midtown. This is the central hub of Ptolus, where you will almost always find mostly humanoids here. This is where you're going to see the most amount of people who are armored, who are carrying weapons. This is where you'll see the most amount of people who I think you're still basically kind of recognizing them as weapons. But in the long run, this is where you'll start to notice people who actually are carrying guns. This is one of the places where most of what makes it up is adventurers, is delvers. And that's what Delver's Square is. By the time you get here, let me have you roll a d8.
That's a 2.
So by the time you've gotten here, you've seen a lot of other peoples, like elves and dwarves, but you've also spotted different things. Like you're pretty sure that was a bull, who stands about like 9 feet tall and has like gems like floating around his head, or like someone else over there who seems to be a lion walking on 2 feet with a massive mane like the size of your torso. So there's a lot of different races inside of this place, and the most obscure of them kind of fit into the actual Delver Square locality. Uh, with a lot of things, you're always walking uphill as you go west. So the further you actually go down Center Street, you're actually walking downhill in this at this point. So where you are now, you can spot some of the greenery of Emerald Hill, but as you go further towards Delver's Square, you'll actually see Emerald Hill is like always visible while you're walking down Center Street, because it will just slowly rise higher and higher above you as you walk lower. But you'll kind of always have like that weird sense of that's one of the greenest places in this area. Um, and it'll probably be one of the first places to pique your interest as far as what you can explore in the city. Um, you can see, looking at the main map here, that these three locations are the biggest green spaces in Ptolus, but the main and the Narid are much less noticeable. You'll see the Emerald Hill immediately upon walking down Center Street. But you can kind of pass through all of that. Um, roll I think wisdom. Just do a d20 here. I think you're +3.
That's gonna be a 5. It rolled from a freaking 20 to a 2.
Gotcha. I think it's enough still to kind of catch your eye, that you see like the same. This is a really small circling with how big this map is. But you can spot there's two different locations right outside of Delver Square where you see the actual emblems of the Ptolus Guard. Um, one of these places will be the actual firehouse. The other is the watch house. And basically, as you enter into Delver Square, you can see that there's one of the actual watch houses of the guards right at the edge of it. When you arrive in Delver Square. The basic kind of feel for the square is this kind of setup that you see here. The actual locations around, what is it? You're looking at the watch house is on this right side as you enter. Potter's Hostel is on the left side, and it's kind of a few different roofs there. And that is effectively where you're looking to stay. And that's kind of where you've been directed to basically like be for the next 2 weeks. Um, when you get into Delver Square itself, you'll probably see a few people who are actively like almost like mock battling. You probably see some people who are like panhandling and kind of like making a show of their magical spectacles. You would not see people using magic anywhere in the city where you've walked so far. Magic is technically still illegal in the city. It's not punished. So there's that weird little area where they're not going to say you're doing something wrong, but it is technically still illegal if they wanted to hassle you. And this is one of the few places where you will pretty much immediately notice people are freely using magic inside of Delver Square. You'll see people who are walking into the earth and eventually see that there are stairs down behind the statue that makes up the center of the actual square. You will see that there are two different pubs in this location. I think you'll have the Ghostly Minstrel is this right side. Actually switch my notes so I can like look at mine.
Please stand by while we deal with technical difficulty.
I don't know, just going from memory versus like actually having a reference is a much different story. So yeah, I skipped the armory. So right next to the watchtower on your right, you'll have the Bull and Bear Armory. Right next to it, you have that largest building is the Ghostly Minstrel. And then you've got Raster's Weapons along kind of the top center here. You've got another pub called Danbury's that is off to kind of the northwest. Little location just below it is Everett's Outfitters. And then the smallest little location is Mirthar's Oddities. So you're inside of Delver Square. You've got these weird peoples happening all around you. And this is kind of like the center of Ptolus. And you're in it right now. Probably space for a few hundred people here. There's probably 100 or so people who are moving around. There is a lot of people around you. You've probably already seen like say like 3 to 5 thousand people just like walking here, and this is like the densest kind of space that you've been in. But this place is a weird thing because there's people everywhere, and that would probably be among like the most odd things that you've experienced in quite some time.
Yeah, I feel like you said, it being real tight packed with all these people and all the bangs and everything going off, he might be a little overwhelmed. So I feel like he would be trying to rush into Potter's as quickly as he can just to get a room and get settled in.
So Potter's itself is perhaps like the most rundown of all of these buildings. It is all three of those first buildings kind of on the left there. All of them are kind of connected by different walkways across different levels, but they're all effectively the same place. So you'll see like a lot of the doors don't seem to actually be like opening with people coming and going. A lot of them are essentially fire exits. And by fire exit, I mean they're locked. If you need to get out because there's a fire, you better have enough reason to knock it down. Um, when you do go into kind of like the central area, the center building, from the other side, there'll be an actual like double door, whereas all the other ones that you see are like these little singles. And you'll notice that there's an occasional person coming in and out. Middle of the day, it's not nearly as important for people to be coming here, but you can indeed kind of head inside, where you will see about the only person who's doing something is this little woman who's kind of got I think she's a tiny little redhead, so she'd probably catch your eye at least a little bit, as another redhead. But you see this little woman who's probably about like 4.5 feet tall, and she's kind of like running around to places, not really ever stopping. But after a few moments, if you're walking in and just like standing in the middle of things, she'll kind of catch your attention, or you will catch hers. But basically, you're walking into a little common area where there are some kind of tiny little tables set around, but you'll notice most of what this common area is just like bench space around the areas, and then like upturned boxes for like a little like paper or some sort of like reading material seems to be like sitting on these. There's an occasional person who seems to be relaxing in that area, but then you can basically see off to your left, there's a room of just like open beds, just kind of dormitory style beds. And you can see off to your right, like where the building kind of like bends with the square, you can see like another small hall of beds like that. And you could probably notice like one of the actual doors that she seems to head through beyond that is kind of like a swinging door, and you can kind of pick up that maybe that third building, the one that's like along this bend, maybe that building isn't necessarily part of the hostel so much as it is used to like assist in it. So you might see like evidence of like the kitchen being on the lowest floor. So she's like heading into this little area, from this little spot. But basically, you can see from where you are, like beds in there and beds in this one. And then this is like the little common area where you're at right now. But if you just kind of head in there and you're just kind of watching everybody for a few moments, it's not but like 30 seconds or so, like the third time you've seen her walk by, that she's actually going to stop, like catch her breath for a moment and, oh, oh, welcome. How can I help you? I'm Winnie. And she just like stares at you, like with her mouth still open.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Winnie. A bed and a hot meal is what I'm looking for.
Oh, we can definitely do that. Um, I've got the dorms, or if you need a private room, more expensive. Do you have coin? Are you? And she just kind of like pauses for a moment. Oh, hot meal. We can do a hot meal as well. What would you care for?
Whatever you have available will be fine. And I'm perfectly fine staying in the dorms.
Dorn, stew. Do you know how long you're staying for?
2 weeks. For now.
I can. And she's gonna like just kind of like pull out like a little piece of like a wooden tablet almost, and you'll see as she's kind of like sliding little beads on it, and she takes a moment and she kind of looks at it. If you end up taking all of your meals with us and you stay for the 2 weeks, I can do for, and she looks at it again, 2.5 gold. If you'd like to put down 2 silver now, and simply keep everything tabbed. You may individually end up with 3 gold, but it's up to you. I think I did that wrong. Let's go for. No, I think that sounds right. Yeah, 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 that sounds right. So 3 gold if you end up staying like the whole time and you individualize it. If you want to spend 2.5 gold right now, you can stay for those weeks. And it's a little bit of a discount. What is that, like 30%?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. He's just going to hand over the 2.5 gold. Which that'd just be 2 gold and 5 silver pieces, correct?
Yeah.
Cool. So that leaves me at like 7 gold pieces and 4 pieces of silver. Yeah,
Uh,
he's just
sh-
go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. What were you thinking?
He's just going to hand over the money and go, "Thank you very much, ma'am. Uh, where can I lay my things?"
Yeah, so when she takes the coin from you, you're gonna see as she kind of like pauses for a moment, and you kind of like ask that question, and she's not really paying attention, and kind of like takes a moment where she like bites into the coin, and then she like looks back at you again, like with a little bit of pause, like it's not a lion. You come from far away. And you can just see like it piques her curiosity. She's seen a lot of things, but you're probably one of the farthest travelers. Um, it's far less likely. You're still on the outskirts of the empire, but it would be at least a little bit of surprise every once in a while to have somebody who's traveled from so far.
I come from the Great North Woods. It's been a long journey, but an interesting one.
I see like a look of confusion on her face as she kind of hears the Great North Woods. And you can see like a little bit of curiosity, and you can perhaps at some point I might be able to grace myself with your company and hear about it. For now, and she's kind of like walking you into one of the actual rooms, like towards the front, like it would have been off to your left when you walked in from Delver Square. And she kind of walks you off, and she looks around, and she kind of just like shows you this area, and will basically look. Any of the beds you're perfectly welcome to. If you decide to leave any things here, please don't leave anything valuable. We can't actually guarantee anything will be here that you do leave. If you would like a safe place to store things, I can certainly do that for you. But there is an extra fee involved. If you do require, there are other places in the city where you can do more long-term storage of anything valuable, and there's definitely places that are more secure than others. But for anything that's valuable, I, I wouldn't leave it here. Um, and then she'll kind of like point off to a few different like kind of like storage cubbies, and she'll kind of like, if you'd like to get any locks or something and you want to try just to lock things here, you're welcome to any of those. And basically they're like a school locker kind of thing, where if you want to like get your own lock, you can throw your own lock on there, and it's kind of like a little bit more secure than being on your bed, a little bit less secure than paying her to lock it up, and much less secure than what she just kind of like alludes to, as there's more secure places in the city.
I've found all a lock on a locker does is keep an honest man honest. I think I'll just keep my things on me. Thank you, Winnie. I have another question. Is there anyone I should talk to about maybe getting some work in the city?
If you would like, you can always see what work might be over at the minstrel. And she doesn't, there's not like a door immediately here to point through. Could potentially say there's like some of those old like kind of fuzzy windows like before glass was like uniformly made so you could actually see through it without distortion, but you can see that she's basically pointing across the square. And the minstrel is a pretty like easy spot to notice because it is effectively it's a beer mug being held up by like an ethereal like clear hand. So you've got like the beer mugs actually like kind of like browned wood and just like this outline of a hand that's kind of like a ghostly hand holding the mug. And she'll kind of point across to the minstrel. The minstrel is always a good place for finding anything. Like you could search for anyone who's wanted. You can often find groups of delvers who are looking to go down into the Undercity, and then potentially other things there. Let me have you roll a persuasion.
That is going to be a 16 even. And man, that thing rolled forever. Good lord.
If you'd like to join the Delvers, they often have actual recruitment where you could pay and become a Delver. I assume that's what's brought you to the city. There's a lot of money in going under. It's very dangerous, though. But if you'd like to search them out, the Minstrel might be the best place there. And she kind of like looks over at your weapons and things and whatnot, and um, best not to spend too much time worrying about Danburys. But if you need to, you could also find other places in other parts of the cities that's less official.
I think I'll be fine where I'm at. Thank you for the advice and the honest direction. That's it. That's all I got. I'm just going to thank her for, all the information and everything. And after I get kind of settled in and get my meal, I'm going to head over to the minstrel.
Gotcha. So she'll take you back to just like that area I just described, like in the entrance scene, where there's not really like tables for her to serve you anything. But she'll bring out like a little bowl of stew for you. She's got like a big chunk of bread that's kind of torn off on top of it. Largely not stale, but it's also evidently like also not fresh baked bread. And effectively, you've got your bowl of soup. If you'd like more bread, she basically says, just ask if you end up caring for any more bread at all. That's and she kind of like looks at you for another moment and kind of like second guesses all you could care for. To don't rip me off extent. And she'll basically kind of like head back off on her way. But effectively, you can have like the stew and like all the bread that you would care for to kind of fill up there. Um, and yeah, that kind of gives you at least a little bit of a moment to kind of like get into the flow of things. You'll start to see that probably every few minutes or so, there's somebody leaving. A little bit less often, you will see that there are people who kind of come and go. I think on some level, she's going to hand you like a simple ticket that kind of like will essentially say, um, for what it's worth, as far as the Westmarches go, it's basically a real time thing. So we're just going to say you are effectively paid September 18th through what's that going to be? October 2nd. That's kind of your, there's still 10 days. So technically 2 weeks is 20 days. But that's basically what your ticket's good for, is like those next 20 days. and you'll see like basically she takes that moment to also recognize like, I take care of a lot of people. If I forget your face, please don't lose this. It's very difficult for me to keep track of anyone who loses their tickets, and I'm probably just going to charge you again.
That's perfectly reasonable. Thank you again for all the help, Winnie.
Yeah, as far as things go, I'm down to just call this as like kind of your entry here, and we can kind of keep going. This is not going to be a normal session because as is, it's already like thrown together last minute, but definitely getting distracted is something as well. So we'll just kind of like play it by ear, see what we can do. Um,
Uh, Listen, I'm gonna just tell you right now what I kind of where want this to go. That way you can do with it as you please. Want to get in here, get with a group of delvers, fuck's sake, and get down there and see what the hell's going on in there.
I got you. Part of the eventual idea of things is, um, I think maybe the Delvers Guild is who, like the Twin Star Marauders should be, and I feel like at some point we might narratively kind of take them over, kind of thing. But for what it's worth, Delvers technically should be player characters, and that's part of the thing. So I'm down to like send you down there with one, which is essentially yourself and a sidekick. But in the long run, like I can't just give you like a full group of NPCs. As with all things, it's always supposed to be you who shines, and they're just there to kind of fill space. So in the long run, like it's already kind of missing. Single player groups will almost always tend to be a little bit more kind of like narrative experiences and a little bit more of kind of like investigations type of stuff. Um, but I mean, we can still kind of play it by ear. Part of what I was thinking is you're welcome to find cause that gets you like going down into the sewers, and we can certainly explore that. But it's one of those things where I'm not necessarily going to just like create a group um, and have you surrounded by NPCs.
Yeah, I get that. Been there, done that with that Curse of Strahd thing because nobody wanted to play a fucking healer or any kind of melee class.
Yeah, I have no focus here. So Ghostly Minstrel is a place that is always busy. You'll be entering into the actual tap room. Most of the place is probably shut down like during the middle of the day. Probably a few people who are actually like over in the dining room. You might see a few like wealthier people like in that area, maybe with like almost like a side or a corner of that place. But most people would be in the actual tap room at this point in the day. Um, Gonna see heading into this. They do have like a concierge at the actual desk. As you can see from having the full map up here, there are places to stay here as well. This is a full on like bar as well as like hotel of sorts, like an inn. At the front desk of the Ghostly Minstrel, there is a young lady, probably just a little over 5 feet tall, kind of brunette hair. Her name is Tellith, and she would kind of welcome you as you enter through the doors. As you see her, like, kind of stand up from behind that little desk there, and just with like a little bit of a bow, maybe like 10 or 15 degrees, you'll hear her say, "Oh, welcome to the Ghostly Minstrel. My name's Tellith. Would you care for..." And she kind of like points off to the room with like a sweeping gesture of her arm. A place to eat, enjoy an ale. Are you looking for a place to stay? And she'll kind of like reach up towards the stairs, almost like craning her arm to like a 90-degree position.
To be honest with you, neither. I was told to come here for some information. I was curious of any work that you know of that needs done in the city.
So she'll kind of like point kind of on the opposite side, like right behind you. Basically, just inside of the doors, there's a couple of like boards kind of pinned up against the wall. Well, you'll notice different things. Like one side kind of has like a couple of wanted posters. Among them, kind of stuck to the front, you'll see a figure with like a big wide brimmed hat, kind of like a dark kind of gaunt sort of face, and he's kind of like staring at you with I think he's got like a cigarette in his mouth kind of feel. And you can see like this wanted poster kind of like links to this person, and I should have the picture for it here. The other side, kind of like looking around, you can see signs of different people who are like just kind of posting messages. Recent Delver looking to head off into, and they kind of list some of their things. Can't think of the first level of like the actual Delvers Guild, but basically like what do when you like join a work like an electrician, they are a journeyman. I feel like journeyman is the
No,
lowest level.
no, apprentices.
Yeah, apprentice. There we go. So Delver's apprentice, and kind of says like looking for anybody who, and they'll kind of like describe this and this, and you can see a bunch of those different things. Most of them, what's going to set them off for you is the recognition that these are actual people who have joined, or rather, these are people who have joined the actual Delvers Guild. And you can kind of see like posts like that. There's other little posts where you can see evidence of people who are simply trying to say like looking to go down into the undercity, and can kind of grab descriptions like that. But more or less, coming to a place like this is a perfect place to find simply anybody, whether they are already particular delvers or people who are basically looking to walk beside the line. Um, the Delvers Guild is a monopoly on maps and somewhat going down into the Undercity. It's not like they are a part of the city government that says you have to join them to do this. It's more they police other people trying to prevent other people from going. And in particular, um, journeymen of the Delvers Guild can actually buy and or pay to copy maps that of places like already spotted out. But effectively, this is a place to come and grab somebody of interest. So when you're thinking about finding someone to go underneath the city with, are you looking for somebody who's more martial prowess? Are you looking for somebody like what kind of sidekick are you kind of looking for?
Yeah. I'm thinking like somebody, heavy armor, barbarian, something like that. So a fighter or a barb, basically.
All right, which one do you think?
Rochambeau, let's go with the fighter. I like some options with my tank.
Gotcha. So if you find like a few different listings that kind of give you the understanding that these people are kind of frontline fighter sorts, are you looking for somebody who describes themselves a little bit more kind of like crassly as they are simply like the sword in front of you? People who kind of describe almost their ability to use magic as well as being fighters? Or do you think you've got somebody who's a little bit more of, you can kind of hear like the strategy and the way that they kind of go about their battles? What do you think is kind of a defining characteristic of your fighter?
I would think they would be more towards the strategist size. Anybody can stand up front and take a hit, but somebody that can think their way through a fight is more valuable.
Gotcha. So while you're kind of looking over those, you can see somebody who seems to describe themselves in a way that you can kind of see like this is very clearly a martial combatant, somebody who seems to kind of describe themselves in ways where they're also a little bit more strategic than they are necessarily just like somebody to be in front and battling. This is somebody who can kind of control uh, themselves and leads a little bit of like an air of understanding, like they can command the battlefield. Um, you see that their name is Erlin Tor. They kind of leave the information that they'll tend to be in Delver Square most days, and they'll take their lunch in the Ghostly Minstrel. That if you are able to find them there, simply look for, and they kind of describe like um, maybe not so majestically themselves in that you can kind of see this is probably not like a narcissist kind of person, but basically it's like, dark long hair comes down to my shoulders, and you'll often see as I'm carrying a great sword, it will often be sitting across the table itself. I um, tend to be clad in a dark black leather. If I've got my traveling cloak on, it itself is green, though it's often stained closer to brown if there's still blood on it. And you can kind of get like a general gist of what this person's looking for, like would be wearing. And they kind of describe it that they would be sitting in the tap room. Let me have you do a perception check.
It's going to be a 19.
So I think as you kind of like look across, you can certainly see somebody who fits that description. That you feel like you're probably here at roughly the right time, and everything seems like that would be the person who you would be looking for. And like you kind of stop reading as like the next part like starts to describe that this person also works in the Warrens, and like if they're not here, find them and you can just like stop reading. But basically, like the next part says like where they would normally be in the Warrens. So you see this person inside of the tap room. If you'd like, you can kind of head across and go grab their attention. Otherwise, what would you like to do when you see this?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going up to him.
Gotcha. So you guys can have a little bit of a conversation here. Effectively, Ireland is a local here. He has a little bit more experience around like the actual town itself, but effectively kind of works as a bouncer and is like super proud of his most recent purchase is this actual sword that he is carrying. And it's one of the reasons why he's hoping to become a delver in the near future here. But you can kind of see like uh, maybe like mid 30s kind of guy, certainly has like scars and wrinkles across his face, that he's been living life, is definitely not somebody who you would expect to have like a cushy life. This is somebody who's living it rough. But he's got kind of the inclination and he's excited to go do dangerous shit. If you start to bring up going into the actual Undercity and starting to kind of search through things, you might already be aware enough through just like posts from the actual commissar of the city that there are the actual the rat tail bounties. That is a good way to make 3 gold like a piece. And he can basically kind of share with you like you guys can enter the sewers in many places. If you want to do it in plain sight, you guys can just try to jump into a sewer grate on any of the main streets. If you're trying to do it a little bit more secretively, any of the side cities that or side streets, if you can find a grate on it, you can pretty much get into like unseen. But there's less risk so much as if you do get caught going into a grate on a main city street, it's more like you'll get kicked out than that you'll actually get in trouble for it.
Okay, gotcha.
And then, like, the other option is if you're actually looking to delve into, like, the Blade Warrens or the Bane Warrens. That's where you start to look into actually going into the Undercity. And it's part of the thing is there's potentially 3 or 4 different kind of undercities underneath Ptolus. And that's one of the things. Sometimes they're interconnected, sometimes they're separated. Sometimes people find new ways down, and that's where, like, the Delvers Guild often has their monopoly, is recognizing some of these interconnections. But one of the other options is to go into the actual Undercity, and he'll kind of point out the actual um, the like guy out in the statue in the center market, um, Runahan. He'll kind of name Runahan and be like, we could always also just walk into the Undercity and find our way, get lost, and maybe find some riches along the way. And you'll see like a little bit of the trepidation, and like with that one, if you get caught, you might get beat up or killed by actual delvers, who basically see you as coming onto their turf.
I think we best avoid that. Maybe just find an alley and go through there.
So, maybe he takes a few moments here. Got a one. He goes to like chug his beer, and you see that he pours most of his beer over himself, rather than actually chugging it. Kind of wipes his mouth, and he'll just like with a little bit of enthusiasm, picking up the belt with his sword and sheath on it, kind of like claims like, oh, "I'm ready to go." And you guys can kind of head off from there, kind of having your hellos behind you and looking for greater things ahead. The two of you can, let's see, this is going to be the mid, kind of step back into Midtown. You've got, what is that? You could like kind of head kind of south and start to get into some side streets. You could potentially head north and find some side streets, or maybe even like look along the King's River and see if there's any breaks in the wall, that might lead into the sewers. What do you think would be your first attempt at finding your ways into the sewers?
Mm, I would probably go and go down to Tavern Row towards Emerald Hills and the river a little ways and try to find an entrance there.
Gotcha. So, like, was that Rune Shalbass? Rune Shalab? Kind of a low quality on the picture when I'm zoomed in. But maybe that's Rune. I can read the Rune Shal something. So maybe down like on that street. I feel like that's one of the first ones you can actually turn away from Tavern Row on. Does that sound good? And like you'll go down that
Yep.
side street. Gotcha. So roll a perception for me here.
That's going to be a 13.
Gotcha. So it doesn't take you long to find there's 2 or 3 different grates, like as you kind of like head off in that direction. Right now there's plenty of people like out on the streets. But at the same time, like this area, as you kind of like duck away from Tavern Row, there's a lot less people like in this actual area. There are still like the occasional person going by. You're not finding nearly as many guards are actually like on patrol in this area. You've got a pretty solid understanding that you've got pretty good breaks. To get caught would be pretty risky. But I'd say this is a pretty easy in for you to jump into the actual sewers. And if you'd like to go for it in this place, just do a sleight of hand. Actually, no, not sleight of hand. Just do a stealth check.
It's gonna be a 12.
12er is solid enough that you're pretty sure as you kind of hop into the actual grate behind you, you don't like hear or see anybody pull it up, jump down. Within a few moments, Erlin's jumping down behind you. Kind of hear like the clunk of it as he like slides it back into place, and like the 20 or so pounds of steel like drops down into the little bit of like the ring around that edge. So basically, the sewer grate can like sit flush with the street again, and you guys can go below the city.
All right, cool.
Let's see. Yeah, I didn't actually reset
I
this.
remember those scribbles.
Do you got a token for what red looks like?
No, hold on. I can find one real quick.
Yeah, when you find one, can you both drop it in Discord, either like message to me or um, and then also rather for Owlbear as well.
For what?
Drop it for me in Discord, and then also drop it in Owlbear so you have access to it in Owlbear.
Why are all the red-headed humans are fucking female?
The simple answer or the complicated answer?
Because people are fucking horny dipshits.
I agree. I was gonna say because redheaded females are hot, redheaded males are an abomination.
Here in just a minute, man. I'm gonna have to take a break, or we can call it for the evening if you want. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, we got so sidetracked. Like, at least we've got like a little bit of like a start for you. As far as things go, like this was just like us chilling, so I'm perfectly fine just kind of calling it here.
All right, cool. Yeah, because my wife went to the store earlier, and now she's on her way back with groceries, so I'm going to have to assist.
Yeah, let's just pick it up some other time when you can do it. If it all works out and sometime you can get her interested, I think it would definitely be legit to DM for the two of you. But in the long run, yeah, down just next time you're good to go.
Cool. Let me know if you get that Spelljammer thing together, man, because I would be in like Flynn for that.
Yeah, kind of same thing going on with that one. Like, as far as things go, I'm trying to step away from the campaigns because it's just one of the things like getting people to join campaigns that are going is difficult. So I would rather try to just run Westmarches where it's meant to have people who can play when they can play. You can come in for one session and it's that one session. If you have free time 3 Sundays from now, you can join it. So right now, the idea of Ptolus is just this is closer to what people know as D&D. Spelljammer would be just a little bit more sci-fi. But either of those is basically the same idea where it's simply just Westmarches. So like if next time you want to play and you wanted to play in Spelljammer, you could just as much tell me like, hey, can you set up something for Spelljammer? As trying to set up something for Ptolus. With that in mind, Spelljammer I 100% need time to plan for. It's one of the things I can at least call on for making stuff like on the spot for like on world is that I've run so many encounters that I can always call on that experience versus like Spelljammer. If you want to play a Spelljammer and we talk about it 3 hours ahead of time, pretty much I'm going to like start the narrative on some world and we're going to have this option in front of us, instead of necessarily like actually including like some of the space elements where you could go just about anywhere. You know what I mean? It's a lot less linear and a more railroady. Like this is the path ahead of us. To me, is much more railroady than giving you a quest that points in that direction, but you don't have to go after the quest. Because essentially what I had from today was recognizing like you're probably going to go towards Delver Square. I prepared some of the stuff, but part of the problem was like you don't actually have a connection to the other people yet, and that's part of where I feel like could have just kind of sold it short and maybe missed the mark, not just like saying, all right, you know this person from this group. Um, but I like the organic starts like that more. That's why it works out casually.
Yeah, I agree. Anyways, have a good night, brother.
Be well. Take it easy, Chase. Always good to talk to you. Take it easy and have a good night.